but the reality is they're trying to meet different metrics, which is maybe that they can administratively show how every kid's differentiated, blah, 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 whatever it is, but they're not concerned about the learning. And that's what
Welcome to Classical Etc. You are in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud and I am here with Paul Schaefer and Martin Cothran. Tanya's not with us today, but I'm sure that you guys can make up.
You think so?
Make up for it.
I don't know that we can step into Tanya's shoes, but we'll just leave her out.
I'm not stepping into Tanya's shoes myself.
A little too small.
Yeah, the heel's a little too high.
Yeah. Oh, well, I wish I could say I knew what she was reading, but I don't. I'm sure she's taking something on her travels, but I'm not sure.
Well, she did read Mars Catlett because the last episode we talked about reading it together over through the summer, the winter storm.
And that's the
Wendell
new Berry book. Yeah.
And I started that. I haven't finished it. She's finished it. I know she has.
Okay, great.
But we haven't talked about it. So
okay. Well, we're just shoveling out of a snowstorm. So have you guys read anything on our snow days?
I was able to finish listening to What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey.
No kidding.
And Bruce Perry. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, how did that come about?
My wife read the book and it's about trauma and particularly childhood trauma and what the research says about it and how to adjust for it and things like that. And since we have foster kids, she had read it. She recommended it highly to me, and it's good. It's one of those books where, like, Bruce Perry, who's a doctor, he's bringing like the research, and Oprah Winfrey, who apparently I didn't realize this, she grew up in a tough home. Like, she grew up with her grandparents initially, and then she went to her mom's, and she didn't feel loved by her mom, and there's just sort of a lot of things going on there. And so she kind of brings the personal aspect of like, this is what somebody who's grown up with trauma goes through. And Bruce Perry brings the aspect of, well, here's what the data says. So it's very interesting if you're interested in kind of what happens to the brain and to a person when they go through that kind of trauma.
Oh, I bet. And it's, yeah.
Yeah, one of the most interesting analogies they made in the book, and Martin, you're a big fan of analogies, was if you were to speak to your child for 6 weeks in English, and then for 6 weeks not speak to them at all again in English and speak to them in Chinese, and then 6 weeks later only speak to them in French or something, that child would never learn to speak because they would never have time to master it. And it's the same thing when they're going from caretaker to caretaker. They have a very similar sort of like need to adjust. And if they're not there for a long time, they cannot learn what it means to be in relationship and to how you interact and what's proper and what your stress level should be and all that kind of thing.
Like those regulating attachments that we form that are so
And if you're not with
profound.
one caretaker that really takes care of you for a long period of time, you just don't form those things. And so it's a harder thing to develop later on.
I can see how that would be a helpful kind of thing to have in your mind as a category when you're relating to the children that come in your home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Martin, how about you?
We talking about books that we're reading?
Yeah.
Is that what we're on now?
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the book my wife and I started. We actually listened to it at dinner. And I had been eyeing these on Audible, because I just like the covers because the covers are sort of exotic. I love these exotic locales.
We had this conversation before the show, and you were giving me grief for judging a book based on the marketing description of what the book is about, and you judge it by its cover?
Absolutely. And so because I love like Sharpe's Tiger. I forget the author of those books.
Right.
Richard.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I love India, British colonial India. I love that setting. And Africa too. I just love these exotic settings in a book because it's something different. I mean, sometimes you read like modern American detective fiction and it's same things over and over again, but if you can kind of get out of that. So this book takes place in Africa. It's called The Number One Ladies Detective The Number One Ladies Detective Agency by Alexander McCall Smith. And it takes place in Botswana. And this one was written in the late 90s. And the narrator with the Audible book is this clearly somebody with an African accent, African English accent. I just think it's just beautifully read. I always tell people when they want to read, if they want to read Cry, the Beloved Country, to read the one that Maggie Soboyle reads, because she's got that same beautiful voice. And the language is colorful. And I just, I don't know if you ever think of colors, like if you associate with a certain story or a certain locale or whatever, but I just hear these deep reds and purples and yet I don't think them colors really mentioned there too much, although there is descriptions of the locale.
Do you have
synesthesia?
Yeah.
Do you know what that is, Martin?
No, but it sounds attractive. Should I?
I could give like maybe an armchair description of it.
Yeah, go for it.
Synesthesia. Someone with synesthesia. There are different presentations of it, but one might be. It's basically like a kind of like an odd wiring of the senses and how they fire. So, for example, someone with a certain sort of synesthesia might hear a doorbell and taste chocolate, or hear the doorbell and smell grass. It's kind of like your senses kind of wire over each other. So a lot of people
same kind of thing as saying that your brain's not firing in all cylinders, because I have been accused of that before.
What's interesting though is a lot of them would say it's firing in overdrive cylinder. So for example, I have a friend who has it, and she has to be really careful about the music she listens to because the colors are so vivid that it's disturbing to listen to. Like, she can't do rap because it's all like red and black, but she can do classical because it's really beautiful. But she sees music as a color. As she hears it, she sees colors.
Yes. And there are other people in the office that have that and talk about that.
Yeah, I don't think I do it, because I only sense it in certain stories. And now that I think about it, in this particular story, she's talking about, or in the second chapter, it's a man who's first person narration. The man is talking, and he's describing Botswana, and he's talking about the deep blue sky. And so I think actually colors are probably mentioned.
You're picking that up from the narration.
Yeah.
It's not that the tone or the sound of the narrator evokes that color to you.
Yeah, it's not a defect in me.
Oh no,
it's an asset of the author.
And to those who may experience these sensory experiences, it's not a defect. It's just an interesting kind of quality.
Start talking about my defects.
Start with trauma. Now Martin's defects.
Oh my goodness. I want to read those detective books. So it's from a woman is the main character, but it's written by a man. That's interesting.
Yes, that is interesting. And then it's like I said, I've just gotten into this. There's like 32 of them. I mean, there's this guy. We were looking him up, and Alexander McCall Smith, and he writes just voluminously. He's always writing. 2,000, 3,000 words a day.
When he travels, at least 2,000 to 3,000 a day. When he's at home, it's about 5,000 a day. Words. And he said that he will write about 1,000 words an hour.
And that's just,
isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's wild.
I mean, that is
and to have it such high quality really was amazing. And I was mentioning to Paul that I had heard this about Anthony Trollope, right?
Really?
One of the great British 19th century sort of not agrarian, what do you call it? The British countryside, and he wrote on trains. He was some kind of an official with the English government or something. And he just wrote a lot. And of course, the books, he wrote quite a few novels, and they're very large, but the quality is just amazingly high. So some writers can do that.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. And it's called
The Number One Ladies Detective Agency. And there's a whole series of them.
Okay.
And again, the covers are just beautiful. The artwork on the cover is very evocative of that African setting. And so my wife and I are enjoying them.
Judge the book by its cover.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
That's right. Sometimes Martin reads colors.
Apparently, that's my brain apparently has that defect.
Well, let's get on to today's show. Today, we are taking up an article that first appeared in the Free Press, and that article is called "We Gave Students Laptops and Took Away Their Brains." Provocative, to say the least. And the article is actually an excerpt from a book by neuroscientist and educator Jared Cooney Horvath, and it's been making the rounds. It puts data behind some things that many of us have sensed for years, that the more digital our classrooms become, the harder it is for students to think deeply and even retain what they learn. The larger book we haven't all read in full. Martin, I know you've finished it. Mm-hmm. Paul's working on it. I've read the article and the excerpt from the book. So we're not really aiming to do a comprehensive book review in this episode, but what we do want to do is use the data and the excerpt as a launching pad to start a conversation about the points in the article that bring out modern education, the techniques, and the data that's being revealed, so that we can see how we might navigate that in the classroom and from a classical perspective. Well, let's get to it. The article and really the data within it challenges some pretty central teaching tools present in modern classrooms. What sort of data did he bring out in the article? I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, what I thought was sort of unique in what I've seen over the past decade in this regard is that he's focusing on not phones,
right?
Not social media, but he's focusing on laptops in schools. And that's the main question is if by giving them a device that is school issued, so we're doing school stuff on that, mm-hmm. Are we increasing scores on standardized tests? Are we increasing performance or what, acquisition of knowledge, whatever, however you mm-hmm. want to measure mm-hmm. it. And because there has been outcry about the phones, mm-hmm. right? Now areas are saying, districts are saying you can't have any phones in schools. Mm-hmm. States are outlawing them in schools. I mean, there's movement trying to solve both of those problems, but they're still giving a Chromebook or a laptop mm-hmm. with unfettered internet access to every age child in the school, right? And what's interesting to me about the data is he's got some great graphs which show like if you're never on a computer, here's what the test score is for math or for reading or for science. If you're on it once a week, here's the average test score. If you're on it once a day, mm-hmm. If you're on it for however many plus hours a day, and just the scores trend down. Mm-hmm. The longer you're on a screen, the worse your scores are.
Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really interesting, his explanation why that is. He got into even the neuroscience behind how our brains process words on a page versus words on the screen, and why it's almost harder to even remember at all what you read on a screen. Mm-hmm. I thought that was fascinating.
Well, and that goes back actually to our conversation about Martin's brain. And
are we going back to this again?
And we've had conversations about actually the different way people
A lot of people talk about my brain.
Yes,
I don't know why. But.
Well, it's us today. But we talked, I don't know, a year or two ago, we had this whole argument about whether we see it when we read a novel, if we see the picture of that the setting's trying to portray or whatever, and I don't, right? Yep. But what he was pointing out is that with trying to acquire information, when we're trying to put something in the memory, our memory always works in a spatial way. Mm-hmm. In the sense of you like I'm not envisioning what that word is telling me, but I do remember where in the book it is, mm-hmm. right? As towards the beginning, as towards the end, it was on the top of the page, on the bottom of the page, left-hand side, right-hand side. And that's kind of like his main nugget that he says, if you're reading words on a screen and they're scrolling, there's no fixity about where that word is. And so it's harder for you to fix what that word is saying in your memory because there's no fixity about where that word was, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and he talks about this in terms of reading and in note taking too. That when you're reading, we are one of the sort of the underlying themes in this book is that we are embodied beings. And so the physicality of things is actually important to us intellectually and academically. So, whereas, one of the beauties of this book is that you can just make the argument, well, statistics show that this method X doesn't work, right? And when we have had data on computers in the classroom for a while now that show that it harms learning. But what I really liked about this book was this fact that he tells you why that is, not just that it is, but why does it not work? And place, like Paul's saying, is one of those things.
And that's really for when you're reading those words on a screen, place is important, right? So when you're trying to assimilate that into your mind, I think, Martin, you want to get into note taking, which is when you are trying to put words down, whether you're doing that by hand or on a laptop. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah. So when I'm reading this book in preparation for the program, I'm underlining, I'm putting marks in the margins, and it helped me today to prep for the show a little bit to go back to the book and see what I had marked. That's the reason, that's your primary reason you think for doing it. But in fact, what's going on is the very activity of you detecting which thing is the most important point and underlining it and putting a line in them. That all is at that moment helping you to embed this somewhere in your mind so that you don't have to go to the book.
But I would also contend, and I think the author would agree with me, that what you're doing, and I've always looked up to you for this, Martin. But when you read, you put on the top of almost every page one line about what's going on that page, what he's saying in that page. And that, what you're doing is you're synthesizing. And when he talks about note-taking in the book, I don't think they get into it in the article because the article was short. And they were really talking about, in the article, about the reading of, right, and trying to assimilate that. But in the book, he talks about when you're listening to a lecture and the difference between taking notes on a laptop versus handwriting. Handwriting is it's impossible to be as fast writing by hand as what this teacher, how fast the teacher's speaking.
Which is the advantage of it.
And that's the advantage because it forces you to synthesize it. So you're mentally processing it and putting it down on a paper in a shortened form. Whereas he gives the example, I think, of his niece or his daughter who went to college with a laptop and just was able to type as fast as the teacher was speaking. So she was taking a lot of it down verbatim. And he'd say, well, what did you learn in school today? She said, I don't know, I have to look at my notes. Because there wasn't any mental processing happening because she was able to keep up because of the speed. And so he's actually pointing out that when you look at the data of how students can perform from lectures based on using technology or not, he's saying actually the technology does make us faster, and it's actually that speed that stops us from doing the mental process that allows us to actually assimilate the information.
We're mentally summarizing, editing, and distilling it down to the one little note that is the only thing we have time to make.
And what's interesting is you would think efficiency, speed would be what you need, but really your brain is hardwired to give you what you need in a sense, because what it sounds like the thing that's most important is what your brain is already wired to do if you've just got a pencil and paper. To kind of triage the most important things, sum it up, and keep going as fast as you can.
Well, and
like a lecture hall.
Right. But that's also a skill that we're practicing, right? by forcing us to do it. And this is the big thing about technology, right? Technology is a tool that allows us to not do something that we would otherwise have to do. Mm-hmm. And so if you're bringing, if the purpose of education is to train you and make you able to do certain things, and you're putting technology in their hands that allows them to not have to do it, they're not going to learn the skill.
Right.
I mean, that's the fundamental philosophical problem with trying to put, tools in children's hands that is going to take out the need at all for them to learn what we want them to learn.
Right. Because we can have more information, but a lot of that's still going to be on the computer. How do we get it in here? That's the point. And really, that is the original argument against educational technology in general that you find in Plato. He basically argues that writing. He just talks about writing.
Yeah.
What we're saying good things about, that even that, because that's the first technology.
Yeah.
Right. And so even in writing, he said, if you put it down on the paper, then you no longer have to keep it up here anymore. So you're no longer forced to memorize anymore. So it's not a help to your learning. It's a replacement for your learning. That's what he argued. And he's done it. You can tell he's doing it a little bit tongue in cheek, but he does have a point there, right? That there are ways that we do things that help that process of getting it in our minds. And there are things that we do that replace that. Yeah. They don't encourage it, they replace it. And that's what education technology really does. And it's in memory, which is what Plato is mostly talking about. Memory is still one of those things that ed tech is problematic at, because it's replacing our memory. Yeah. We can put it on this machine. We can put it on the hard drive. We can, what about this hard drive? Right. Which is what we're trying to develop.
And I thought, one of the best points that he made, just to help people understand the reality of what we're talking about, and we probably should have started with this, is that when a lot of us hear technology in the classroom, what we're thinking about is maybe there's a screen at the front of the classroom with
smart
projector.
Board. Remember when those were a thing? Yeah.
Or there's a computer lab or something. And he says, like, it is absolutely not that way. I bring that up because that was my experience going into public schools with our foster kids when I finally was allowed to. First foster kids was during COVID and we weren't allowed to, but once we were allowed to, every time I walked by a classroom, the majority of the class was on a screen. Maybe a few
individual screens,
and maybe a few kids were sitting around the teacher's desk and they were trying to do something specific, but the vast majority of them were on a screen, and they're not doing the same things. So and I ended up in a fight with the principal trying to get one of our kids to repeat kindergarten that their bio mom was okay with, and everyone was like, this would be the better thing. And the special ed people were all like, yes, let's get her to repeat kindergarten. And the principal was like, absolutely not. And when we had a conversation about it, her point was, we are differentiating. So in first grade, there's going to be a whole cohort of the classroom that's at her level, kindergarten, right? In the first grade classroom. And you're going to have kids in the first grade classroom that probably, can be going a little faster. And you've got all these differentiations. And this is why I think a lot of schools are relying on the technology, is because a teacher can't differentiate like that in a class of 30 to the degree that the schools are expecting them to, because the schools aren't willing to hold kids back anymore.
And so she can't teach. And this is another aspect of this that is not discussed in this book or the article. And that is that education technology serves a very important ideological purpose because of this exact thing that you're talking about. Because they want, what has progressivism wanted to do for 100 years? If you look at the history, they want to sideline the teacher. They want to get the teacher out from the front of the classroom. Don't be the sage on the stage, be the guide on the side. This is what teachers were told for generations. Well, what's going on now? They're accomplishing this through this individualized learning, where everybody's doing their own thing on a Chromebook or whatever it is. The educational technology serves a progressivist purpose in our schools, and it does it much better than any tool they've ever had.
Well, and I think a lot of districts either know or believe that 5-10% of their teachers aren't good qualified teachers. And so they think if we can put a software in front of them that's done by really competent individuals, then they're going to learn more. And what's actually striking is that no, they won't actually learn more, because there was a statement, I'm not sure if it was in the article or the book, something along the lines of researchers believe that 38 minutes out of an hour a child is on a device in order to quote unquote learn. 38 minutes is wasted. They are not actually they're not actually doing anything that is learning, because the technology is designed for engagement, not learning.
So from the perspective of maybe a school administrator or even a teacher, how would you evaluate a technological tool to say, is this in or out?
He actually gives 3 great questions. It's at the end of the article, isn't it?
Because I wonder, like, maybe a parent is wondering that. Maybe a teacher, maybe someone who wants to bring something into their school and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to do something detrimental, or maybe I should pull out this thing that I've been using.
Yeah, well, anything that distracts them from the instruction of the teacher or doing some kind of on-task reading in class is bad. And that's exactly what these devices do. One of the things in traditional education is time on task. How much time are you spending on task? Well, what you just said is evidence that it's detracting from time on task.
Right. They could spend that 38 minutes doing something that's actually moving towards the learning.
Yeah, and there is learning technology and there's teaching technology, right? So what are they called? Prometheus boards, I
the
think.
smart boards, yeah.
I mean, I've seen those in classes, and they do what needs to be done in large part if they're used properly. And so I've always said, I think I wrote an article one time. What are you going to do with that $5,000 technology grant you got? Buy a smart board of that kind. But don't buy a bunch of separate devices, one for each child, that is going to immediately, the first thing it's going to do is detract your attention from the teacher.
Yep. Yeah.
Or maybe to the task at hand. So for example, I could see an iPad having like a math game, but that's not the same as what we do on paper in 2 minutes with your math facts.
That's
you
right.
have to know those, and you go just with a timer and a paper and a pencil really fast, which is totally different even from a tactile perspective than it is to like look at some colorful buttons on on an iPad maybe.
Well, and I can't remember if it was in the article or in the book, but he mentioned that how I think it was in the book, and he talks about the Oregon Trail. Did you read about the Oregon Trail?
Oh, it wasn't in the article, but I played that.
Yeah. He talks about the fact that when he remembered playing the Oregon Trail as a kid, and he remembered dying from dysentery. That's what we all remember of, right? And
it's hard to remember your death.
But when you play Oregon Trail, you remember that you die from dysentery. And he talks about how the fact that it wasn't until he was in his 40s that he realized that the Oregon Trail was actually designed to be a history lesson. That was the intent, was it was going to teach you history.
The original intent. And
that was the original intent. And yet none of us know where the Oregon Trail started, where it ended, why people were dying from dysentery. We don't know any of it, right? And he said, but what I remembered was, the times that I actually was able to make it to Oregon or something, right? Like, because it's all coded for engagement and they've got the colorful badges and the this and the that, that's what the kids remember. That's what research is showing, is they're remembering the math game. Right. They're remembering, how far they got in the math game. They're not remembering
long division or whatever they're trying to do.
I mean, and there are some gains, because it's not like when you test them, they're at 0, right? There are some gains, but it's not nearly. The stark thing is that generations since I think World War II, every generation was testing better. And he says, actually, the test results were always correlated with the amount of time we spent in school. And now test results are dropping, even though we're spending just as much, if not more time in school. And that's the interesting thing, is that we thought we were sold with educational technology, this idea that our kids were able to be able to go faster or be able to learn more and faster.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is they're learning less. They're mastering less.
Yeah, because there's all these pretenses that this ed tech movement has. They're beliefs that they voice, which they cannot possibly themselves believe. I mean, does anybody really think that the computer game, The Oregon Trail, is anything like Francis Parkman's book, The Oregon Trail, which it was presumably? No, nobody really thinks that, right? But we just throw it out there, and everyone's supposed to believe that, and everyone thinks they're supposed to believe that.
So in school, instead of having a lesson on the Oregon Trail, let's all go play this game.
Let's all go play this game, and because he goes through in the book myths that built edtech, right? Yeah. And one of them is that entertainment enhances learning.
Huh.
Well, there are times when it can, if it's properly if the activity's properly constructed, but not most of the time. Most of the time, education is work, at least in the early years. You're striving for leisure, but to be able to sit down and read a hard book and enjoy it, that's what you want. But at the beginning, there's some drudgery involved, and there's others he mentions that entertainment enhances learning, that free choice leads to better learning. If you let the student choose what to do, then that's going to enhance the process. They're going to learn more from the thing they chose rather than from the thing they didn't choose.
He has a great thing about kids don't know what's good for them, and they don't know what they need to learn, and also the educational technology that's designed in order to meet that allow them to choose. They're allowing them to choose like what font color, the size of the font, or stuff like that. It's really not stuff that. I mean, and I've seen too where they just have a dashboard because our foster kids would come home on an NTI day, and it would just be like log into this and read a book about something, right? Like it was science, and so there's a whole bunch of science books, and they're supposed to open it and read it about anything. Well, how's there going to be any sort of evaluation on that? How are you going to have any conversation with the kids about what they read if they're all reading different things?
And some of this goes back to this whole learning styles thing. This is just a pet peeve of mine, because you hear this a lot, among our homeschooling friends. Is everyone, my child is a kinesthetic learner. My child is this or that. No, actually, the research is telling on this that really has very little to do with how you should teach something or what you should teach. How you teach something, and this is my big pedagogy thing that I've been beating the drum on for several years now, is that how a child learns is one of the least relevant things about teaching, okay? Because this learning styles thing is largely mythical. You determine how to teach something by the nature of the subject you are teaching. The subject, how it's constructed, will tell you how to teach it.
Right.
And if it's a skills subject, you're going to do it a certain way. If it's more of a content knowledge type of subject, it's going to be another way.
Right.
That's what's going to tell you.
With learning geography, you're going to have a map, right?
Right.
Like you're not going to cut that out because the kid's an auditory learner. Like that's ridiculous, right? I do want to get back. Your original question was, what does a parent do, right?
Because in the article, at least in the excerpt, he is very strong to say, demand evidence from your school.
Yes.
And it's just interesting to think about, like you tried to do that in your own way with your foster kids, and it got, where did it get
go
you?
anywhere. It didn't go anywhere.
Right.
But the reality though, is they know it. So here's another story, right? So this was same kids, different school, when they'd gone back to their moms, and their mom asked us to go to this meeting that she was going to have at school. And they were asking that one of the children get tested with ADHD or for ADHD. And I said, okay, I understand that you're asking for that, and she needs to get that done or whatever, but what can she do at home? And the first words out of the lady's mouth, the school person's mouth, was limit screen time. She said, screen time is brain rot. And my wife, God love her, she just started laughing. And I was trying to be polite, but my wife, she calls a spade, and everyone kind of turns to her and she goes, I'm sorry, that's just, you say that, but we walk by the classrooms and all the kids are on devices. And they're like, well, here, we limited, it's only 15 minutes at a time, blah, blah, blah. And so, but the reality is they're trying to meet different metrics, which is maybe that they can administratively show how every kid's differentiated, blah, 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 whatever it is, but they're not concerned about the learning. And that's what I appreciated here, where he says, demand evidence. And what you're asking for is independent replicated research that it shows that it improves learning. And he says, and if it comes from the vendor, it doesn't count, right?
Yeah. Which I thought was fascinating.
Yes. And then he says, ask for internal data. Like, have they then piloted at school and then made sure that it works for your school, the demographics, the teachers there? And then if no meaningful research exists, ask for a clear rationale that's evidence-based, answering what specific problem does it solve? How will it improve learning? And not just logistics. And then why is this the best available solution?
And demand that the research come from somewhere outside the educational, not just the tech industry, but the educational establishment.
Yeah.
Educational research is terrible. There's a section of his book where he talks about, and if you go to education research, it turns out everything works.
Yeah.
Everything passes muster because we don't know exactly what we're comparing this performance to. There's no homogeneity of in the research in terms of what you're comparing it to. So, and I think to another point I was going to make. So in education research is what it was. In education research, we did an article on this several years back at the Classical Latin School Association, our school organization, and there was a study, and it was a meta study. Okay, in a meta study, because a regular study you study like 2% of something or whatever, but a meta study goes and looks at all studies and sees what they say and how they're structured. So
I'm not sure about all, but like it's a study of studies, right?
No, the sample is basically all the studies put. That's what a meta study is. It studies, if you're doing a particular topic, it's going to take all the research studies done on that topic. So then what in this case, it was on education studies, it was how many of them were replicated. In other words, this is like the basic test of research is, has this study been done again somewhere else by another researcher, and was the finding the same? Yeah. You have to have that done, otherwise you can't rely on it. Well, 0.13%, that's 0.0013 of the education studies out there had been replicated. Yeah. They couldn't meet the most basic qualification. So where you need to go, and what he does in his book, is to the studies that have been done in cognitive science by competent cognitive scientific people who actually know what they're doing in terms of mental development. So
and he's showing stuff over a period of years, saying when you look at this test and when you ask the question of how many hours of screen time a day are they on or whatever, then what was it in 2012? What was it in 2016? What was it in 2020? So that you can see a consistent, that you're getting the same data time after time. But and I think that's actually brings up a point about, like, don't just go to your school if a school is wanting to put this in and say, what's the evidence, right? Because the evidence can be fudged, right? The question, another question I would ask is, if this, like, what's your sunset horizon? If you put this in and it doesn't work after 2 years, after 3 years, after 5 years, like, when does it get pulled out? Right. And because like it or not, any change like this is making the kids guinea pigs, right? We don't know. Now, the reality is, I think he said 88% of districts already have like a one-to-one program. Like, there's not, that's districts in the US. There's not a lot of schools that don't have one-to-one programs out there. So
one-to-one is
a device per
to child.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so the question I would be asking is really, like, what's the goal of it, right? Because you have some schools and they might tout a one-to-one, but really all they're really wanting is they're wanting the books on a device. They don't have to carry a backpack, right? You got one device, it's all there. But the reality is they're still using it where the teacher's up at the front of the room. They're teaching. They're referring to a textbook. The only problem that I can see based on the data that he's presenting is that it will be harder for the kids to memorize or for it to stick in their minds what they read because it's not in a fixed place, right? It's on a screen. It's a distraction, but probably not a massive detriment, right? Then you've got schools like ours, the Online Academy, which we're using it as a tool to get a live teacher in front of them, right? It's not recorded video. It's not,
there's actually interaction.
There's actually interaction. And we are very clear that we don't think that is better than when you have a live person in your community that could teach them, right? Like we're there as a stopgap if you don't have anybody in your community. And so because we recognize the limits of the technology, we would rather have our teachers sit down physically with your child, but
but still there is a personality there in front of it that is reacting, because one of the things he talks about in this book is the things that teachers bring to the situation that no machine can bring to the situation. There's he calls it, talking about affective empathy.
Yeah.
The knowledge that your teacher who's helping you right now cares for you and wants to help you, that helps you actually accept it and do the thing. And when you have a teacher who and the teacher tells you to do something, you're going to do that thing if you respect that person. And you can't, all that kind of stuff is just non-existent when it comes to a computer and doing it with a software program.
Yeah. And so like in those sort of two scenarios, right? Like the first one is a logistics thing. We don't have to carry books, right? Or it's cheaper to buy digital books than it is to buy physical books. The second one is it's a tool to make that live interaction come to your child that doesn't have access physically. But then you have the third one, which is where the train goes off the rails, right? Which is just where you're just going to have a device and the kid's going to log on and do their work and that's it. And that last scenario is where you see all the drop off is where you're expecting the computer to teach the child. It's just, that's where the data shows it's just and the kid, they expect, and in a lot of schools that are doing the one-to-one, they're expecting the device to be teaching the child.
Yeah. And another one of the points he makes is that the promotion of multitasking. This is promoted by not only explicitly, but in the way that these devices work. And with a book, it's hard to multitask with a book. You open up the book and there's words on the page and you read the thing and you go, and you can become distracted there. There's things that can hamper you from doing that. But one of the things that it doesn't hamper you is another thing that's completely different with another that's coming at you that is distracting you from doing your main work.
There's no notification.
It's just, there's no comparison between a book and a laptop or a smartphone when it comes to focus, as opposed to the multitasking that they promote, actually.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure habituates fractured attention.
Absolutely.
And it just is so formative, right? I even notice it when I don't know. Have you ever done practices where you try to keep everything away from you and just focus for something on 2 or 3 hours? Even I cannot, it's just
hard.
difficult.
It is hard. And you have to, with me, and I didn't grow up with these, but I get them later in life. And it's easy when I'm sitting there and I'm reading this.
Yep.
And I wonder if I've gotten that email from somebody. I
know.
Yep. And you got to take the phone, you got to put it in another room or something.
Yes.
You have to come up with ways to do that.
It's so much worse for I have that experience, but then when I'm trying to work on my computer,
I know,
and I'm I need to hammer out whatever it is, whether it's a project or whatever it is, and I'm getting chats that pop up, and this
on the same screen.
Yeah,
that screen
emails,
it's all coming through.
It's all coming through, and you just cannot stay on that one task. And, and to me, what worries me is the gamification of everything, right? So you talk about lack of attention span. What's happening we're keeping the kids' attention spans because we're gamifying it, right? And we're making it in such small chunks that you can't, they can't take their eyes off of it, right? But if that wasn't there, or they're doom scrolling, right? Like if you don't have the opportunity for something new every 5 to 10 seconds, then the developers know they'll just put it aside.
Yeah, I mean,
they'll get bored by it.
Yeah, I mean, here's a test, and I'm basing this on my own grandchildren who don't have devices. I mean, they can do that when there's focused time to do that.
Yeah.
But it's very intentional. There's very little of it. They're using books. And I will see my little 4-year-old, and he will get up in a chair, and he will take a book, and he'll sit there with that book for 10 minutes, which for a 4-year-old is pretty
long
good.
time.
It's a long time. And all my children are that way. All my grandchildren are that way. And so I think one good test would be get a book that maybe one that you've read once or twice, so they're already going to be kind of interested in, and just set them down in a quiet room on, maybe your living room, somebody turn everything off, and set them on the couch and give them the book and see how long they can sit there.
Yeah.
And if it's just, and then we're on to something else and we're constantly, then you probably need to reduce the amount of digital technology in the child's life.
Yeah. And encourage them in small increments to lengthen that time. I mean, I think I mentioned recently, like my nieces and nephews that stayed with me, and it was different between them staying with me in the summer where they go outside and being in the winter. But they kept asking to, like, they want to play video games or watch a movie or whatever. And I'm like, no, like being bored is good. But then, like, I don't know, towards the end of the 4 days, I had noticed, like, we have a whole, like, set of the great illustrated classics, the abridged versions of the classics. And because I love those as a kid, and I reacquired them as an adult because it's like kids come over, they can read them. Well, my 10-year-old nephew, like, he sat there, and one day I said, "Oh, did you start reading that?" He said, "Oh no, I read that whole book yesterday." And I was like, "Well, good for you." But because we forced him to be bored, and because he has learned to have that attention span, he was like, "Well, this is what I got to do, so I'm going to read." I was like, "That's amazing." Like,
which I forgot to tell you, we made a board jar.
Oh, did you?
I'll tell you how it goes. When I got home, they were like, "We made a board jar today." And I was like, "Awesome."
That's awesome.
Well, and I remember my kids. We didn't have that technology when our kids were young. Really, there was. I think I had a computer, but so they would. When, like, it was snowing, like it's been snowing here recently. They went out and they built snow forts, and they spent all day outside, and a lot of kids just don't do that anymore. And then I got a little video on my the family chat, yesterday, and my oldest son and his wife's 4 kids, they're out there, and there's this video of little Sylvie, who's 6 or 7 years old now, and she's coming down on the sled, and there's a jump, and she just goes whoosh, out of the picture. We're going, what happened to her? Did she land? Okay. I mean, but they're out doing that. Yeah. Right. And where's a lot of kids are just sitting inside in front of a screen. It's just so tragic.
Best
it takes away your childhood.
Yeah. Your best memories as a kid is going sledding, like twisting your arm, getting landed on by the person behind you, like
breaking a few bones. Nothing.
Yeah. Like what? Yeah. I mean, and kids just, they'd rather sit inside and on a screen, but there's, this whole context, again, I think it's important because it's all in a classroom context. I think it's important for our schools. It's important for the homeschooler to think about, like, okay, the technology I'm using, is that a technology that is going to enhance learning, or is it something that fits in the entertainment time, but may actually hone maybe a specific skill? So, like, my example, like, I was a kid, mom hated letting us on computers. We barely watched TV, but when I would go to my dad's office and dad needed to work and we were there, on Dad's work computers, they had installed Math Rescue and Word Rescue. They were MS-DOS games, and they were kind of like Mario, where you'd kind of go through the screen and you'd collect stuff and whatever. But if you got caught by a monster, you had to answer a math question. And then between every lessons, you had to do like time drills. Like you had to answer as many as you could, and that got you a certain amount of points. Did I learn what 4 + 7 was playing that game? No. Did I get faster at it? Yes. And that sort of thing. But that was always in my entertainment time. That wasn't in school
the
time.
other lesson from that too, I think this is important, is that if you're going to have an education technology, make sure it's really primitive.
Yeah.
We had this game. It was a plastic thing with a screen. It was called Geo Safari. I don't know if anyone remembers
I do
those.
recall that.
Geo Safari, and you had all these cards for different subjects, and there was all these buttons that you could push for the right answer. You get either a multiple choice question. My daughter sat at that thing, and he'd go, and it asked the question, and she'd go, and then you go to, and there was there was these literally cardboard cards, big cards that you'd slip in there. It was extremely primitive. My daughter got so much content knowledge out of that game. So if you're going to do it in a very primitive form, because it doesn't do all the bad things that screens do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe it's helpful to say what we're trying to say is technology really is on a spectrum when it comes to implementing it. It could be a game that they learn and they get to they know this is like play game time, but
not the Oregon Trail, but maybe GeoSafari.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. But even that's the thing is like even the Oregon Trail, if you are intending that to be entertainment, that is one thing. If you're intending to be learning, that is a very different thing, right?
Yes.
What's the context? What are we trying to achieve here?
And what is the structure of the game? Does it really lead you to learn, or is it just entertainment?
Right. The Oregon Trail did not have questions in between every level that were historical in nature that you had to learn in order to pass the level, right?
And I never quite understood that, the enjoyment of dying from dysentery.
For me, it was the hunting.
Myself.
I loved the hunting.
Okay.
The oxen. Yeah.
The oxen. So, but it's all like, what's the context, right? My nephews, when I've had to pick them up from college school and I have to sit for an hour to an hour and a half before I'm ready to go home, like I've pulled out Math Rescue and Word Rescue, which are online in like HTML format. You just Google for them, you find them. And I said, play these games. Primitive, right? But they work on Windows 10 computers, whatever, that because you just find them online. But also, they're not supposed to be in school at that moment, right?
Yeah,
that is a key thing, right? And so, okay, I know you're going to learn something. It's better than you playing Halo or Zelda or whatever. You're going to learn a little bit of something, but also my goal is not for you to be learning new content in that, which is what a lot of this article and the book is targeted at, is when you're trying to teach new content that way, doesn't work.
And I think that's a helpful distinction to say we're not necessarily anti like a fun game, but but in like the science class period, maybe
right.
choose a different path.
Teach them.
Yeah,
that's
maybe
right.
do science.
That's right. So it sounds like a couple of takeaways from this might be, one, if you haven't read the article, we thought it was very interesting. Martin, would you recommend the book?
Oh, I really think this, I used to use all the philosophical arguments and Plato's argument and all that, but this guy has got the goods. This is very well written. The research is presented in a very orderly way where you can understand the points really easily. And there's just this book is really packed with a lot of great
It's called
stuff.
The Digital Delusion.
Yes, by Jared Cooney Horvath.
Can you hold it up a little bit? And there we'll see it. And then another takeaway might be for families with children in schools. Hopefully we gave you some traction on how to think about approaching your school, or even just starting to notice your students, what they're taking home, how they're doing, and some trends there.
And he has a couple of things also, like buy a printer. When your kids come home with stuff, they need to do it, print it out, do it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, even stuff like that will help. If you don't have control necessarily over your school system or your school, but trying to get your children to do stuff as much on paper is going to be helpful.
Yeah. The two best pieces of education technology are this and this.
Pencil and paper.
Pencil and paper.
Got it. Is there anything else you want people to take away from
I mean, I would just reiterate, like, I mean, I've experienced this in my own life. I got to college and iPads were a real new thing. It was like the end of college, went to a different college. So I'm going to go buy an iPad. And I did the same thing with the note taking. I was taking almost verbatim notes, and all of a sudden my scores that had been great all through college, they just tanked. And after the first test, like in every course, I was like, screw that. I went back to pen and paper, and my score shot right back up. And that, like, it doesn't, when you're an adult, it doesn't take long to test it and realize what's working, what's not working. Kids can't do that.
They can't.
Kids can't do that.
And I remember my first job out of college was selling computers when they first came out. I mean, I was right there at the beginning, right? And I've always used them a lot over the course of my job and all that. But, you learn to see the advantages and the disadvantages. And I think if it's helped me in my job in many ways, but it would not have helped me in school.
Right.
Got it. Well, this was a great discussion. Thanks for reading the book, Martin.
Well,
the article was great.
Did it for you,
I need
Jess.
it's on my list. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for all you brought to the discussion, and thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical, Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical, Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.